All right, now let's look at the latest reports. The Wagner mercenary group, which has been fighting side by side with the Russian military in Ukraine, now seems to be leading an armed rebellion in Russia itself. Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin has reportedly said his Wagner fighters have crossed the border into Russia from Ukraine, and social media, of course, has been abuzz with videos of unidentified armed troops into southern cities. Now, in response, Russian President Vladimir Putin has called the actions a betrayal from the inside and state treason, and he says those who have chosen armed mutiny will answer to the law and the people of Russia. Well, we're now joined by SABC News' International Editor Sophie Mokoena, who is, of course, following these extraordinary reports. Sophie, let's start with the Wagner group. For people who aren't familiar with this mercenary group, just give us a bit of a history and their involvement in Ukraine.
Well, the group was started by a private citizen at that time, the man who was in prison and who later was involved in hot dog business, and also at some point in time he was called President Putin's chief. But unfortunately now he has been involved after starting a private company, a private military company. They've been operating in different countries. As you know, in South Africa, we have similar companies, the mercenaries, that often go to different countries to fight when they have been paid by different governments or individuals. Sometimes it's all about ensuring that there are coups in these different countries. When you look at what's happening in West Africa, you can see the role and the impact of the Wagner, where you've had these military government taking over with support of Wagner. Now, it is a company based in Russia, and they have been in a front line, particularly fighting Ukraine. And President Putin is a friend to the leader, but now there's this fallout. Unfortunately, the fallout started a few weeks ago, particularly with the military personnel or the army generals of Moscow, because they were not happy in terms of support system, the food, the military capabilities and the arms that they were requesting from Russia. And they felt that they've been left alone there to fight this war with no support from the generals in Moscow. And therefore, they have made an announcement that they will turn against these generals. And that's what they have done.
Yeah.
And all along, President Putin was not responding or getting engaged in the discussions, and also in terms of responding to what they've been saying. It was only the generals in Russia who were responding, the military personnel. And now finally this morning he decided to respond, even though he didn't mention the leader, because of the relationship that he has with the leader. And therefore the question is, what is going to happen? And we know that they are now driving towards Moscow. We see visuals from Moscow where the military is also on standby and being deployed all over Moscow. The mayor of Moscow has just announced that on Monday people must stay at home, and therefore they are bracing themselves for confrontation. And this comes at a time where Russia is also involved in the war in Ukraine, which is something that is going to weaken President Putin's resolve to continue to fight in Ukraine.
Well, that is my next question for you. I mean, just on this history, I mean, the Wagner boss Prigozhin has made this extraordinary claim that Russian forces have actually killed some of his men, which would mean sort of an internal battle there that is unexplained. Now they're moving towards Moscow. What sort of threat does this present to the actual Russian Federation? And this must be a crisis for Vladimir Putin himself.
It is a crisis for President Putin. We are told that he's still in Moscow, even though earlier on we saw the visuals of his plane leaving Moscow. We don't know where the plane was headed to or whether he was inside. It's just a decoy. We don't know. The reality is, when they arrive in Moscow, it is going to be a serious battle. If that leads to a serious battle, people are going to die. this is a serious matter. The next coming 48 hours are going to be very, very, very crucial, because we don't know how the military is going to respond. And at the end of the day, these are people from one country, and therefore they are now pointing guns to each other, and therefore it is going to be a civil war. We don't know what's going to happen. We know that President Putin has spoken to some leaders in the region, including President of Turkey, giving him an update. We also saw the former President of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, saying that they support President Putin and rallying the nation to support President Putin. But we know Russia is divided. We know that every election, yes, President Putin does win the election, but you have a chunk of voters voting for the opposition. And therefore, even Russia, the internal challenges in Russia are very complex. And therefore, the question is, are the NATO forces supporting Ukraine going to use this moment to ensure that they give Ukraine support to retaliate? Wagner is saying that they are still fighting on the front line, but I don't think so. Even on the continent, where you have these private military personnel of Wagner, now the question is, what's next for countries such as Mali, who depend on Wagner for protection, including Libya? And therefore, this is a crisis, a big crisis, not only for Europe, but also for the continent.
All right, and like you say, the coming hours will be crucial. We'll follow that closely. Thank you very much, SABC News' international editor, Sophie Mokoena.